Nick is a program director at the Sierra Business Council. He earned a bachelor's degree in industrial engineering from the California Polytechnic State University at San Luis Obispo. Nick manages SBC's climate change mitigation programs, including greenhouse gas inventories and climate action plan development for both local governments as well as special districts in the Sierra Nevada region. And then Steve Frisch is the president of Sierra Business Council. The Sierra Business Council overall is implementing a number of interlocking climate mitigation and adaptation programs with a strong emphasis on how climate action planning can strengthen local economies. So that's their introduction, and I think Nick is going to start us off with his program experience around inventories and climate action plans.
So Sierra Business Council, a little bit about what we do. We're a nonprofit organization. We're based out of Truckee, and we have an office also in Sonora that helps implement our Sierra Nevada Energy Watch program for direct install energy efficiency. And SBC has been actively advancing a shift towards sustainability in the Sierra Nevada region for almost 20 years. And the way that we do this is through on-the-ground projects that both promote and develop the economic, environmental, and social capital of our region. So I'm going to go over, hopefully pretty briefly here, to make sure we have some time for questions at the end, because I think that's probably the most important part about why we're here. So a little bit about the process that we've done over the past few years, developing greenhouse gas inventories for local governments, and then moving into now starting to develop energy action plans for those jurisdictions that we've inventoried. We looked at it in the first approach as the local government operations scale, and the first round of inventories we did were specifically focused on that inventory set. And then in our second phase, we did community-wide emissions inventories for many of the same jurisdictions that we worked with for the municipal scale. And we I'll identify some successes in the next couple slides here, but at the end of our phase two, we were able to work with 2 jurisdictions specifically that hadn't been reached before, and we did at the same time a combined municipal and community-wide inventory and provided them one report with both inventories. And that's kind of been the approach now that we're going to take and move forward with additional jurisdictions we're working with. So as we inventory the jurisdictions, then we're moving through our PG&E program into energy action plans, or as I think we were calling them to start, was an energy efficiency chapter of a climate action plan. So we're working with the same jurisdictions that we've inventoried in the first few rounds, and helping them to develop policy and codes around actually implementing energy usage reductions in their communities. And then once that is all complete, taking those energy plans and incorporating them into climate action plans, which is a lot harder topic, especially for us in the Sierra Nevada region, as far as the funding sources. And so obviously within our funding constrictions in our current program, we're not able to provide the planning resources that go beyond just the energy use and sectors revolving around energy use. And that's somewhere where SBC is able to, I think, kind of really bring that full circle service to the jurisdictions we work with, and trying to identify different funding sources to complement the work that we're doing. So the successes I'm going to talk about are mainly dealing with the inventory program. Over the past 3 years, we've completed 38 inventories for local governments in our region, and we're just now only starting into working on energy action plans with a couple of those jurisdictions that we've already inventoried. So we've obviously realized a lot more successes in the inventory arena rather than the actual planning process. And so a couple of the quick successes here, and the list obviously could be endless here because I feel like we're learning every day new ways in which to do this work. I think one of the major successes that we've seen is what I just briefly mentioned before, is having the inventories combined and being complete at the same time. I mean, a lot of the local governments we're working with in the Sierra Nevada are different than some of the jurisdictions that some of you may be familiar with if you're not, if you don't know very much about rural jurisdictions. You know, we have contract planners that represent the planning department for a lot of these jurisdictions who only come to the city or county to work 1 or 2 days a week, and so the resources are very limited. For us, being able to provide both inventories at one time, only requiring their service and participation over a 6 to 9 month period, is huge and beneficial for them, because we're not having to come back to them multiple times to really do a lot of the work that can be done concurrently. So that's a big area where we've seen some efficiencies realized. Another big one is our work type specialization. The first round of inventories, we had interns assigned to a single jurisdiction or multiple jurisdictions and dealt with the whole data set within that jurisdiction. So we saw an opportunity to be able to provide better quality data and just understanding of the data from having an intern who is specifically dealing with a certain data set. So last round we had a gentleman who had technical background and experience in transportation, and so he owned all of the data collection and conditioning around the transportation data for all the jurisdictions we worked with, and that really helped provide better ownership and quality control of the data that we were actually providing to jurisdictions. And that was actually an idea of the previous program manager with us, which is, we're going to move forward with that again this round because I think it's very beneficial. And then we actually have in the audience Emma Ingebretson, who's a project manager with us. She manages our intern team, and a big success that we had in the last program, or in the last inventory phase, was in working with many jurisdictions. The SEEC tools are very beneficial, and in the respect of being provided for the local government to actually develop the inventories and climate action plans themselves. But when you're working with 15 or more jurisdictions, there's a lot of repetitive calculations and conditioning that needs to be done to the data. And what Emma and her team figured out was, writing just Excel-based algorithms to go through and calculate thousands of lines of data at the same time was a little bit of an upfront cost and time spent, but it saves a ton of time and actually has better quality control in the end, because it's one decision, one calculation, and it's going through thousands of lines of data. And we're reducing the amount of human error, the possibility for human error. And now for one real success that we've seen in the energy action planning that we're starting into is that even though we kind of look at it as we wanted to do a full climate action plan for these jurisdictions, in the same respect that we're talking about streamlining the inventories, only having to pull them together for community outreach at one time and get everything taken care of, obviously we're not able to do that through our current program structure. And so a win or a success from that is that a lot of the jurisdictions look at this as they're still taking a next step. They're still moving forward with us in a smaller, more easily understandable approach to most of their community members. And it's easier to gain support around energy-specific planning reduction because it's a lot more economically feasible and understandable to the general public. And so they're looking at this as they're still moving forward. It's not quite a climate action plan, but they're moving in the right direction. I think that is that for that slide. And I'm just going to touch on, I think, one or two items here, then hand it off to Steve to talk about that last bullet point. Now, through the challenges, obviously, we've had many, many lessons learned. One of the major ones that I want to address is kind of the cost approach. It's been a common practice of promoting, the co-benefits of this work above and beyond the actual benefits of the work. And there's been a couple of times where that's we've realized, we need to be conscious of that not only being the only approach. And I say that because coming to an elected official and saying, hey, this is a free program we're offering, we're going to come in and help you solve ways in which you can reduce your energy usage for free, and there's no cost to you, then a lot of the elected officials are actually concerned about that because of their concern about the quality and what they're actually getting out of it. So really honing in and understanding what the methodologies are, where they come from. And Steve and our team, we've had many discussions and research sessions trying to figure out exactly, where all the emissions and factors are coming from, and why these assumptions are being made, so that we're defendable when we go to elected officials and say, here's your free information, but we're not just giving you a cheap service, it's a quality service, and this is why. So I'm going to go ahead and hand off to Steve now to talk a little bit about the.
Great. I'm gonna stay seated because I'm more comfortable with that. I just have a minute, and I want to talk about the need to incorporate climate communications and a climate communications strategy into your program from the very beginning. So one of the biggest problems we face in our region, and I think this crosses many urban jurisdictions as well, is the political challenges and the political process of moving this work forward within the region. And what we've learned over the years is that incorporating a communication strategy in from the earliest stage and recognizing that it's a critical part of the strategy and being willing to actually fund it, pay for that, and use the staff resources to train and bring people up to speed on good communications is critically important. And there's really three components of that we think are necessary. The first is the local government staff, because we're a non-governmental organization working primarily with local governments, but this would hold true, I think, for local governments as well. Local government staff has a tendency to be able to talk about their area of expertise from a technical point of view, but they're usually not people that have been trained in communications and communications techniques and methodologies, and they're uncomfortable with delivering a message that they might not be completely, that might not be in their sweet spot. So working in advance to be able to frame these issues, not just in a climate perspective, but looking at the economic, the public health, the preparedness, co-benefits that go along with that, and equally kind of advancing those at the same time that you're advancing the climate objectives. And then also being able to clearly articulate the avoided cost side of the equation, how climate planning actually helps local jurisdictions meet their difficult to meet budget targets and reduce costs in other areas. The second area is with the decision makers themselves, that is the people who are going to be voting on whether to adopt a climate action plan, and creating the support networks in the community that are necessary for them to be able to make what at times might be tough political decisions. So, it is indeed true, as Woody Allen said, that the rules are made by the people who show up, and local government decision makers need people to show up to support their positions if they're going to be taking tough positions. So not only do they need to know how to communicate about them so they can clearly articulate the co-benefits, but you need to get the stories told in the room that will help them make those decisions. And then finally, the issue of communications with the public themselves, framing the messages in a way that resonate with the local communities. The more local storytelling that you can tell about how climate adaptation has actually helped somebody, or how energy efficiency has helped somebody. I'm always reminded of that great scene in To Kill a Mockingbird when the mob comes to take Tom out of the jail, and Scout says, "Well, Mr. Cunningham, you deliver walnuts to our house. I know your son. We go to school together." The ability to tell that local story that gets the connection, the personal connection, that makes it more difficult to kind of have an incivil public atmosphere is incredibly important. And then also aiming the messaging at the rational center. Most people want to engage in kind of a civic dialogue, and really focusing in on that thing of creating the right framework for a civil dialogue and not overreacting to kind of the challenges that may come along. And quite frankly, sometimes those challenges are entirely accurate. We recently ran into a case where data in one of our inventories was in our eyes not accurate enough, and really kind of made a commitment to the public to go out and change that and work on making sure that was taken care of. So, and then I think it's also critically important when supporting the local decision makers that you're making the link between the decision maker, whether that's a city council member or a member of a board of supervisors, and the staff that's actually working on the projects, because often staff feels like they're not necessarily supported as fully as they should be in advancing a policy, and they're not quite sure what their boundaries are. So making those boundaries really clear and getting decision maker support for staff action and reinforcing that continuously through the process is really important. So, so the things that I think our key lesson learned is, number one, the importance of planning in advance and that making communications a core part of the strategy. Number two, training staff both in the private sector and the public sector in how to communicate and support each other. ICLEI has wonderful tools on outreach. Often those tools can be adjusted for local application. And then finally, relying on relationship, the importance of relationship, that in public decision-making processes, often it is the relationship between the members of the public who are saying they want something and the decision makers that really put it over the top. So building those strong networks and relationships throughout the process. So.
Our next speaker is Cal Broomhead from the City of San Francisco. Cal oversees climate and energy program planning and development for San Francisco Department of Environment. He started off as a home weatherization installer, and he has since helped author the city's first plans for sustainability, electricity resources, and climate. And currently he's working on the city's first climate adaptation planning effort. Please welcome Cal.
Thank you very much. Also, what you don't know is that in 1968 or 1969, I dropped out of engineering school at Berkeley, and now I work with engineers. About 10 years ago, I gave my first talk on climate change, and sometime after that, I was talking before the East San Jose Rotary Club, which about a third of which are, let's just say, they're very long-time retired folks. And what I did at the very initial few minutes, I asked them to talk to each other in twos or threes to exchange their ideas about what they could do about climate change, personally, what they could do. And I gave them about a minute to talk to each other, and at the end of that, asked them to be quiet down, and then I asked for hands of people who would tell me what someone else had told them. Not their idea, but somebody else's idea. And one guy raised his hand. He was one of these well-retired guys, and he says, well, my buddy Bill here, his idea for fixing climate change is that I should ride a bicycle. And that's really what it comes down to sometimes, is the implementation. How's this all going to happen? And we'd really rather somebody else do it. Anyway, on that note, this is San Francisco's greenhouse gas emissions inventory. We're about 20% residential if you add the 6% and the, 21% residential. It's almost 45% cars and trucks and transportation related. We got a little wedge there for 5% for waste, and the rest is commercial. I'm not going to go into any detail on it, but that's how we stack up. Not too different from what I heard the Alex talking about for the state. In terms of process, and that's what you wanted to find out about, is how do we take our greenhouse gas emissions inventory and then turn that into a program and then implement it. And I really wanted to echo what Steve was saying, is you really need to keep the public in mind and and build that into your process of creating your plan. And I will say that our very first plan had very little of that, and that was back in 2004 when we issued our first plan. In this last update, we actually had 5 community panels that involved over 60 community organizations, 30 local businesses, the Business Council on Climate Change. Yes, in San Francisco, we have a Business Council on Climate Change. And the Building Owners and Managers Association. So we had a lot of public input. And the 5 panels were one on energy independence. I don't believe, I think the guy in the blue shirt actually might have participated in it. He's a local solar installer and very active. New Century Transportation, Gray to Green, Open Space, Urban Forestry, and the Business Advisory Committee that focused on the on business aspects of the city, and then one which was on economic prosperity and environmental justice. So from these 5 panels, they did come up with a set of recommendations. And of course, we had consultant support, which isn't cheap. It takes money to actually be able to crank the numbers out. They want to know how much greenhouse gases can we get, and they want some ideas on what it might cost, that sort of thing. And it's really helpful in putting together the plan. And of course, we have a plan. But then the question is, so what comes first? Which of the projects, of all the competing projects, are going to make it across the finish line? Which ones you're gonna start with? So there are a lot of different considerations that you can take, and I'm gonna give you some categories of them that we can use, and then I'll show you one way of using it. How big? How much is the strategy? What's the potential in terms of greenhouse gas emissions? Are you going to get a little bit? Are you going to get a lot? Pretty straightforward. And then the endurance of those emissions. This is kind of a one-shot deal, something you're going to put a lot of effort into, and then over the years it's going to gradually kind of fritter away unless you put a lot of effort in it to keep it going? Or is this something that once put in place is going to endure for a long time? Cost. And cost is not just dollar cost. It can be political cost, and it can be risk. How much political risk are you taking? What's the chance that you're actually going to succeed? There may be a big potential for failure here, and failure is not a good thing. So, what damage might that take to the reputation of your project or of your program, or your department, the city, et cetera? Another is strategic importance, and strategic importance might be that with this project, it's got high value because you're creating a new strategic partnership that you haven't had before. Maybe you're bringing in an industry that has been out of it, or you're bringing in a part of your demographic within the city. Maybe it's a project where you're bringing in all of the churches, or some other strategic alliance that you're making where you've been able to align the goals, and that's important. Or maybe it's a window of opportunity, some money that's coming along, or a new state law, or something that's coming, an opportunity for a new development, or something that's about to happen, and when it's gone, when that opportunity's closed, you won't have that opportunity again. So strategic considerations. And then synergistic things. I want to point out that in the lower right-hand corner, we've tried to credit the photos. About 2 months ago, our department got notified from 3 different photographers that we were using their photographs without paying them, and so we had to wipe out all of the photos in all of our presentations. So morguefile.com is a great source for. They're free, and you can use them forever. So the idea of synergy is that this project may actually meet multiple goals. It may help with your urban forestry goal and your mitigation, but it might also help with crime fighting, or some other public health goal, or a community goal of some sort. So it's looking for those kinds of synergies. And then finally, growth. Think about growing capacity, growing reputation, growing the professional skills of your staff. Growing into a new area that you need to get to, but you haven't done it before. So you might be a small project, and it may not have much impact, and maybe really low score on all those things, but it may be the foray into a new area. So how do you bring all these things together? And I imagine you could all think of different ways of doing it. Here's one way, where you assign weighted numbers to these things, and give each category gets a weight. And then you take a project and you give it scores based on particular issues. This uses 0 to 5. You could use 0 to 20, or 0 to 3, whatever you want to do, or 1 to 3. And then compute it out, and then every project gets a number, and then you weight them out. And after you've done that a few times, I think you'll find that the next time a project comes up, you'll kind of know where it goes. You'll have an idea. And I've done this enough that sometimes we look at the list of how everything fell out. We all look at each other and go, yeah, I could have done that in 5 minutes. I didn't need to go through this whole process. So, you make up your process, whatever's going to work for you, to be able to sort of weigh what you think are the most important. Now, of course, going back to those 5 panels, you've got the mayor's office, you might have your city council, your board of supervisors. Those are all people that are going to weigh in where the resources come. So what have we been able to accomplish? 1990, we were up there above 6 million tons. We're now at 14.5% below that. Yeah, that was in 2010. We're waiting to see what the 2012 numbers are, just starting to collect those today. So by the end of the year, or certainly this time next year, I'll have another graph. We'll have it, that black line will have extended. Our climate action strategy looks like it's going to get us to our 40% below target by 2025. But you notice it levels off, and we really don't know how to get down to our 2050. We haven't figured that part out yet, but we're hoping that sometime, maybe before I retire, we'll have at least an idea about how to actually get there, or that's the next generation's challenge. So where have we been successful? We've been really successful with our waste program. We're at 80% diversion today. And my understanding is if we're able to complete diverting, if we were able overnight to divert all of our green waste, we would hit 85%. Then the rest of it is a lot of difficult stuff to get to, composite materials, et cetera. We've had retrofit programs, ARA-funded retrofit programs, Energy Watch-funded programs through our PG&E partnership, and now we're launching our BayREN program, our Regional Energy Network program for retrofits. This is a before and after picture of a boiler. We found lots of 100-year-old boilers that were put in shortly after the 1906 earthquake, and they were still chugging away. So it's great opportunities. The biggest impact we've had, and as was mentioned earlier today, is that we cleaned up our electricity a little bit by shutting down. We had the 2 oldest and 2 dirtiest power plants in California. We're in San Francisco, Hunters Point, and the Potrero plant, and they've both been closed. So some things to think about when we're developing an implementation plan is to think about the market stages. And how many of you have ever done sales or marketing? Okay, you know about this stuff. Over on the left, the innovators. Over on the right, the laggards. Any laggards here? Yeah. Up until about 5 years ago, I was still carrying a pocket watch. I can't even get it repaired anymore. So I'm kind of a laggard. So lots of different strategies for moving the market from the left up to the right. And I'm going to talk about 4 that are most common to local government. The first one is information, just providing information. It's cheap, it's easy to do. I meant to mention at the very beginning, the other thing about San Francisco is that it was burned to the ground 4 times, not just during the earthquake, but 3 times during the gold rush. And the phoenix is on the city's symbol. And so our ed group turned it into Phoebe the Phoenix, who goes around to schools, and she visits about 12,000 school kids every year, 12 to 20, depending on what's going on that year. And it's very effective education technique, and they've been doing it for so long. Phoebe's been so hard at work for so long that now kids are in high school, and they've really been pushing for recycling in their high school. So the high schools have all finally gotten on board with the program. We have digital information. How many of you have got solar maps for your local government? I see several hands going up. We've about 5-6 months ago finally got our wind map up to show citizens where the red areas indicate where wind might be viable. And that way we can tell people that for most of them that putting rooftop wind on their home is not going to be very cost effective. We have, I think, 5 pilot projects that went up, and none of them were actually generating any wind. And I told them all that beforehand, and they wanted them anyway, and so there they are. Another great informational tool that we're just really starting to see some results from is our departmental climate action plan. We have 48 reporting departments where we provide them the information on their departmental climate footprint. And then they write up a plan on how they're going to reduce that footprint. And they submit it to us, and we score them and give them back to them. And then we have an awards program to really, celebrate those who've done something great. And it's really been an amazing thing for our staff to work with the staff at all of these different departments, the police department, fire department, et cetera, and to see the ideas that are being generated by them. It's really been, it's the kind of thing that gives you goosebumps. So those are kind of informational programs. Another example, an example of technical assistance, kind of the next level. Gabby's up here in front, and she knows all of these people because of people who work with. These are engineers who go out for our retrofit program. But the idea of technical assistance is you've got those people who say, okay, this is a great idea. I thank you for the information. I want to do it. How do I do it? So these are the how do you do it people. They go into the businesses. They answer the phone. They walk people through things. We do a lot of work, hand-holding. In fact, about almost half of the budget for any of our retrofit programs is in technical assistance because people really just don't know what to do. And then I want to talk about incentives. And we talk about incentives. I know this is something that the state's very concerned about because, hey, we've only got so much money, but we know a huge amount of work needs to be done. How are we going to do that? So we're trying financing. But incentives really do work. But there are lots of different kinds of incentives. In one of our early programs, we actually did a change out. We said, the incentive was, we'll give you a free high-efficiency lamp if you bring us one of these halogen torchieres things. And we had 1,500 people show up in the rain in Chinatown. 2 passing Canadian tourists thought it was a religious ritual. To get our green building program really going, the planning department had a 6 to 8 month lead between when you would submit your application and you would finally get your first appointment to talk to a planner. Now, if you're putting up a $50 million building, that $50 million sitting for 6 months is a lot of money. So when they said, well, I tell you what, if you guys will jump to the front of you can jump to the front of the line if you'll promise to be lead gold. Within about 3 months, the entire line moved over to the lead gold window. Planning department kind of freaked out, but they staffed up and they met the challenge. And after that, the Board of Supervisors said, you mean they can all do this? Yes, it's all doable. Well, let's pass it. That's when they were ready to pass a law. They just put it 2 years in advance with kind of some ramp up, and we now have a lead gold requirement for all new construction in the city, residential, commercial, everything. If you're a single family home, we don't get a lot of those being built in the city, but for those that are, they've got to do 75 points green point rated. 1 minute, beautiful. Final one is law, and this is Gavin Newsom signing in our energy benchmarking and disclosure ordinance. We've passed a lighting retrofit ordinance, and I think at that point I could stop. And then we can, take questions. There's lots of other things too, kind of reality checks, and I think that's enough for now. Go to Tim.
Our next speaker is Timothy Burrows, Climate Action Coordinator at the City of Berkeley. Timothy leads the City of Berkeley's efforts to reduce local greenhouse gas emissions and prepare for climate change impacts. He led the development of Berkeley's award-winning Climate Action Plan in 2009 and is responsible for finding effective ways to track and report progress on the city's sustainability goals.
All right. Good afternoon. Thanks for coming. What will it take to achieve deep reductions in greenhouse gas emissions? What will it take to achieve our local climate action goals? The premise of my presentation over the next few minutes is that effectively measuring and monitoring your emissions over time and monitoring and measuring and communicating the outcomes of your projects and programs, doing that monitoring and reporting and communicating over time is a necessary precondition to achieving deep climate action plan goals. It's fundamental to actually achieving the deep reductions that we've set for ourselves. So that's the premise, and I'm going to explain that over the next few minutes. And I think you're going to hear a few different themes that Steve and Cal mentioned as well, which is probably good. There's a thread weaving through our presentations. So Berkeley has been working as long as any community in the country on innovative strategies for reducing the emissions that cause global warming. We've been working on a robust bicycle network. We've been working on a robust pedestrian network, green building strategies. We have minimum standards for energy efficiency in existing buildings, homes and businesses in our municipal buildings. We have the first curbside recycling program in the nation. We've been working on this a long time. These are climate action strategies. But are these strategies actually reducing greenhouse gas emissions? And are these strategies collectively, are they getting us to the goal that we've set for ourselves in Berkeley? Part of my job is to be able to answer that question. And I think in order to achieve the deep goals that we've set for ourselves, we, as the practitioners that we are working at local governments and other organizations working on climate action, we have to be able to answer that question effectively. So Berkeley, like many communities, like many of your communities, we've established very ambitious greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals. We're not alone in establishing very ambitious targets. Our targets are an 80% reduction by the year 2050, below 2000 levels, and 33% reduction below 2000 levels by the year 2020. And part of my job is to keep our city council and our community up to date on how we're doing, what our progress is toward achieving those climate action goals. And I think someone mentioned this earlier. I think it was Ken Alex. Part of the challenge is how ambitious these targets are. You know, if you think about 80% reduction, you think about what your community looks like when we're driving 80% less than we are today, or what your community looks like when we're using 80% less energy. Necessarily, our communities are going to look a lot different than they do today. We're going to function a lot differently if we're going to achieve these targets. And part of my job is to keep our community and our city council up to date on how we're doing. So this is sort of a busy chart with a lot going on. So I'm going to tell you sort of what the key takeaways are for this chart. Hi. Hey, how you doing? Good. Door's down there. Good friend of mine. So I'm going to tell you, I'm going to unpack this chart for you, but I want to start with some of the key takeaways. So the two key takeaways I communicated to council when I showed them something similar to this a few months back. One is that we're doing a lot. We're achieving some success in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and we need to celebrate that. We need to recognize that. But we're not doing enough. We're not achieving our greenhouse gas emissions reduction target. So let me explain how this chart communicates that. And I brought a handy little thing just in case I needed it. So the purple line coming across here, that's our greenhouse gas emissions trend from 2000 to 2011. Our community-wide greenhouse gas emissions trend. It includes building energy use, solid waste, and transportation, the three main sources of emissions in our community. Our community-wide trend is something that we should celebrate. We've actually decreased emissions on a community scale by about 8% since 2000. Very few communities can claim any reduction at all. Very few communities can demonstrate a reduction even if they think they've achieved one. So we are happy that we've achieved some reduction, and we want to celebrate that. This red dotted line going up here was our initial business as usual forecast. So this is sort of our assumption for what emissions would do in our community if we didn't do anything about it. If they just grew based on growth in population, they would sort of grow upward about 1% per year since 2000. So our actual reduction since 2000 is not from here to here. It's actually from what emissions would have done down to here. And we're about 17% below our business as usual scenario. And what I like to tell our residents and our businesses and our city council is what this gap represents here is a lot of great stuff that we're doing in our community to reduce emissions. This is us making our homes more energy efficient. This is us driving less, riding our bikes. This is a lot of good stuff that we're doing. It also has a lot to do with what the state's doing. It impacts that quite a bit. But certainly what we're doing is in that gap, and we need to celebrate that. But are we achieving our target? This black line going down here is our target line. That's 33% right here. It's 33% below 2000 levels by the year 2020. And we are about 13% above where we want to be as of 2011. So we're doing a lot, but we have a long way to go. And so when I showed City Council something like this, they're a pretty good group of people. They're good leaders. They said, okay, well, what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do to get us from where we are now to where we need to be? And so we started to look at that question. And the first thing we looked at was, okay, how does state policy affect Berkeley's local emissions? A lot of great stuff coming out of, as part of AB 32 and the Global Warming Solutions Act and the scoping plan associated with that. How are those policies going to affect our local emissions? Things like the Renewable Portfolio Standard, which is making our electricity greener. Things like the Low Carbon Fuel Standard, the Pavley Bill, SB 375. So we took some time and we did some analysis of what those strategies would do to get us from where we are to where we need to be in 2020. Now, if we stopped doing anything in 2011, our business as usual emissions, our forecast would be that our emissions would begin to go up again, right? So population is going to grow about 0.5% per year is what we forecast. So this is our new business as usual. This red wedge right here is our estimate for what impact state level policy will have on local emissions, from getting us to where we think we will be in a business as usual scenario in 2020 to where we need to be in 2020, 33% reduction. About 60% of that gap, of this full gap, about 60% we estimate could be achieved through state level policy. And that's a big chunk, but it also kind of makes sense. If you think about the Renewable Portfolio Standard, it affects everybody, at least everybody that uses electricity. And most people use electricity. So it affects everybody, a big impact. Low Carbon Fuel Standard, something similar. So that's a big chunk of what we need to do. The state is going to help us do. And so that really speaks to the importance of working with the state to encourage strong policies at that level. Existing strategies and planned strategies that are in our climate action plan, so existing are the green, and additional plan that aren't yet in implementation phase are in the yellow. These strategies, we estimate, will achieve another 15% of that gap. So together with the state level strategies and all of the local strategies that we're working on, or at least the ones that we can measure or that we can analyze, we're at about 75% of our target by the year 2020, which leaves a 25% gap from where we think we could be in 2020 to where we need to be, which is about 70,000 tons of greenhouse gas emissions. So I want to talk a little bit about what the scale of that 70,000 ton gap looks like, that additional 25% that we're going to need to achieve. In order to achieve that 70,000 ton gap, it takes all of this. Zero waste by the year 2020, eliminate waste from the landfill. Unprecedented energy efficiency and clean electricity, the equivalent of the energy consumed in 16,000 Berkeley households would have to be reduced. We have about 44,000 Berkeley households. So 16,000 of those households, that's the equivalent that would have to be reduced to achieve that gap. And this isn't an or, this is an and. Zero waste, energy efficiency and renewables. And then third, a massive shift to non-car forms of transportation and decarbonization of the transportation sector. A reduction the equivalent of taking over 28,000 vehicles off the road, which is almost half the vehicles registered in Berkeley, would achieve the 70,000 ton gap by the year 2020. So these are unprecedented reductions that have to be achieved by the year 2020. And so the premise of my presentation is that these scale of reductions will not be achieved without two very specific things that have to happen, right? And first let me say how difficult it will be politically to achieve this scale of reductions, how hard the decisions are going to have to be to achieve reductions that deep. Our elected officials are going to have to make some really, really, really hard decisions that maybe they can't make right now, maybe they can make later in the future, but they're going to be really hard decisions. And I think Steve talked a little bit about this in terms of communications. It's harder for elected officials to make difficult decisions if they don't feel like they're going to be supported in the community. So two specific conditions, I think, have to be met for us to achieve this scale of reductions by the year 2020. And I'm going to relate this back to metrics in 1 second. One is an empowered community, empowered residents, empowered businesses, really empowered and informed community-based coalitions. Groups of residents and organizations in our community that can go to our elected officials and give them the cover they need to make the hard decisions that they're going to have to make to achieve these deep targets. Because it's much easier to not make the hard decision, right, inherently. So if they're going to make the hard decisions, they need the support from the community. In order for community members to provide that support and to make that argument to elected officials, they need to know how we're doing toward our climate action goals. They need to see the data. You know, if I'm a resident and I go to my council member and say, we're not doing enough, and the council member says, well, how do you know? Well, I don't know, I just feel like we're not doing enough. Residents and coalitions and organizations need to be empowered with information so they can communicate, they understand where we're at. What are the strategies that are working? What are the strategies that are not working? Where are we big picture? That information is power, and residents and organizations can use that power to go to elected officials and tell them, we need to do more, here's what I think you should do, and if you make this decision, I'm going to support you. I'm going to come to the council meeting, I'm going to come to the community meeting, and I'm going to be there to support you when you make that hard decision. You need the performance metrics in order to support that process. That's why performance metrics are fundamental to achieving these deep reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. The second condition I think we need to achieve that scale of reduction is to integrate sustainability, climate action, whatever you want to call it, integrate it into how our organizations function as a local government. You know, a lot of us work in organizations where we've got some pretty good green projects going on, but oftentimes they're led by a core group of green staff. Maybe it's one staff, maybe it's a half a staff, maybe it's several. But oftentimes it's an isolated group of greenies over here in the corner, right? And it's not integrated into the fabric of how the organization works. And if that's the way that it is, we're not going to achieve scale. In order to achieve scale, it needs to be part of every decision we're making as an organization. When we're updating our general plan, we need to be thinking about how can this general plan help us advance our sustainability goals? When we're developing infrastructure projects, how can we develop this set of roads or paths or infrastructure in a way that's consistent with our sustainability goals? Everybody has to be asking and helping to answer that question. And again, we can't do that unless we know how we're doing and where our resources should be going within our organization. We need really better tracking of how we're doing, because that can empower that process. Right now, I'm working a lot in the city of Berkeley to strengthen our cross-departmental, multi-departmental team within our organization that's trying to sort of institutionalize our climate action plan into how we do business. And a lot of what's driving that process is that gap that I showed you earlier. Having the ability to show people that gap and how significant the reductions are that we have to achieve. And also having the ability to celebrate what we're already doing and demonstrate that. That actually can help support a lot of these processes that I'm talking about. Yeah. So I talked a lot about the why you'd want to do this metrics work. I didn't talk too much about the how, and I'm sorry if you were here to learn more about the how. We can talk a lot about that as well, and I'm happy to be a resource for you and talk about how I'm tracking our community-wide emissions over time. We also track a lot of performance metrics related to our specific programs, all of the efforts that we have underway. We try really hard to measure those things and report them on our website on a regular basis, report them to community groups, to city council. We do a lot of work in that regard. And I'm happy to talk to anybody more about that, and I encourage you to check out our website to see how we're communicating that information. But what I want to emphasize today was just how important this process is, no matter where you are in your climate action planning effort. If you're just developing your climate action plan, work this in. If you've already developed a climate action plan, now's the time to start doing more work on communicating how you're doing over time, because it's fundamental to achieving the goals that you've set for yourself. Here's our website where a lot of our metrics are located, and there's my contact information. And let's have some questions and discussion. Thank you.
Timothy, you talked about focusing on city operations as a way to reduce emissions. Could you tell us what percentage of the total emissions come from the local government sector? Because I know in Benicia it's so small, so it's hard to justify spending time on those projects.
Yeah. So two things on that. One, I should clarify what I said. Was that I didn't mean to say focus on city operations per se, but our operations are also very small. It's 2% of total community-wide emissions. But we also provide, part of the function of our organization and all of our organizations is to provide services to our community members that make it easier for our residents and businesses to produce fewer greenhouse gas emissions, right? I mean, we maintain the infrastructure, we provide incentives, we provide technical assistance, we do general plans, all kinds of plans that affect the community. And so my emphasis was not to focus on the footprint of our operations, but to ensure that everything we do within our operations and all of the services that we're providing to the community members, we integrate a sustainability element into that, right? And that doesn't just affect the operations, that affects the community as a whole and can have a much larger impact.
More questions?
Hi, Mindy Gregg. You mentioned a little bit, Nick, in yours and about decision makers, and I'm curious, how did you engage the decision makers, and how important do you think that is to the overall success of actually in San Francisco and in Berkeley making these plans sustained and ongoing? Because I think I've heard other places where that's been a really difficult barrier for people to get to the decision makers and have them support their efforts.
Just in forming our community panels, we conferred with both the mayor's office and each member of the board of supervisors who represent districts. So we tell them to suggest to send people to the panel, and so we get their input so they feel that they've had a chance to participate.
Yeah, I think in our case, part of it was developing relationships over a 20-year period with people that actually are eventually going to be in a position of being decision makers. So, I think that's a really important part of it. But I think Timothy was pointing out something kind of interesting. Like, what it takes to go to the next step is going to be really, really tough. And having a set of values that only values this because of climate impact is not going to be enough. I mean, we actually need to embed these values in all of these other things that we think about, like economic prosperity, crime, mobility, access to recreation in our communities. Like, we need a broader set of climate values that actually transcends the traditional coalition and gets to behavioral and cultural change. And to get to those metrics, that's really what it's going to take. And that is a long-term kind of communications and coalition building strategy. And I think that's kind of a fascinating issue that we aren't really fully talking about yet in this field. You know, what does it look like in 25 years to do what we really need to do?
Yeah, I've used the metrics. This is something I talk about all the time, the performance metrics and kind of what I showed you, that graph. That's really what I've used to get the attention of the decision makers. We adopted a climate action plan and everybody was very excited about that, but obviously it takes a lot more than adopting a plan to actually achieve reductions. And so because we were able to come back year after year after plan adoption and say, look, remember this target, we're not there, we're going to have to do more, and to demonstrate that was very attention grabbing, and probably depends a lot on your community. In Berkeley, we have a city council that is very committed to addressing climate change and reducing the emissions that cause global warming. In a lot of communities, you don't have that, and so certainly those other values and messaging are even more important, although they're also important in Berkeley. But we use the metrics to catch their attention, and then we do that regularly. Here's how we're doing. We're going to have to, here's what's going well, here's what's not going well, and make it very tangible and make it very real. And now we have this sort of posse within the city government that has bought into it and is now going to city council and saying, look, we understand these deep reductions we have to achieve. Here are some proposals. Here are some proposals that we think can achieve this percentage of the gap. And here's this other thing that's going to achieve this percentage of the gap. And it's all about the gap. We've got this gap visual that we keep putting in front of people, and it seems to get their attention.
Great.
Ken Alex mentioned at lunch the role of CEQA in this. I would like to think that we have leadership in our region that cares a lot about meeting the climate goals. But the reality is we're in a fundamentally conservative region of the state. And what they really care about is meeting their budget objectives, complying with or being able to comply with CEQA in the future. Like right now, it's about, like in our region, it's about avoided costs and and kind of doing what needs to be done. That's why the role of state policy is so incredibly important to drive that, right? But what happens is that people start seeing, I might be doing this because I want to avoid future costs. And they start seeing all of the co-benefits manifesting themselves in their communities, and it becomes part of the culture, which I think is really important.
Great. More questions? Yes.
David Carlson, County of Santa Cruz. I was just wondering if each of you could touch briefly on support for your work in terms of funding. Is it general fund supported? And what kind of grant support or other forms of funding is there for each of your offices?
Yeah, our office or our department is we're labeled as a revenue generating department because we get no money from the general fund. Most of our funding comes from the recycling stream, comes from the ratepayers through our contracts with PG&E, with Energy Watch and Bayren, from foundation funding, from DOE, EPA, various state sources for the toxics work and other pieces. And what I wanted to say is that recently there's been a lot of money focused on adaptation now. The foundation world is really starting to ramp up on this. And they're very interested in looking at regional efforts. And they're also very interested in being aligned with other federal and state funds so that they can leverage and have an impact on how those funds are used by offering things in a way that leverages more DOE, EPA, and state funding. So they're becoming much more savvy about how they fit into the whole picture. Groups of foundations are coming together to align their goals to be able to be more effective. So it's really very interesting what's going on in the funding world, and you need to be kind of opportunistic about those things. And going back to what Steve said, with the foundation world, and I think with the state, it's also about building relationships, seeing what's coming down the line, finding out what their goals are, and also communicating to them what our goals are, so that they better know how to shape how they're going to write that RFP so that you can respond. And it's going to provide the sort of project that they really want to see happen. So it's an education process that we all need to provide to state agencies, federal agencies, to foundations. Anybody who's got purse strings of any sort, we need to be educating them so that this becomes a team approach to getting where we need to go.
We're funded, our staff is funded partially through a small fee that is placed on top of permit fees in the city of Berkeley that goes to our office to support mostly our green building work, so the support that we provide for people coming in for remodels or new construction to help them build green. We also have general fund funding and a lot of foundation funding. I think probably getting to scale requires sustained sources of funding. It takes so much time and energy to go out and get grants for all the work that we want to do, that it's hard to sustain it, because there's an opportunity cost to that. So I think wherever possible, and maybe we can do more of this as if we're successful at integrating this work deeper into our organizations. Wherever possible, we find ways to attach fees that provide sustained sources of funding to the type of work that we want to do. Boulder has a carbon tax, right, which is unbelievable. I think it's the only carbon tax municipal carbon tax in the nation, and most communities can't do that. Some communities, though, can do little fees here and there on tops of permits or whatever else, business licenses, that can then be dedicated to sustainability. But we're probably not going to do that until sustainability is more of a core value of everything we're trying to do, and then more funding can start flowing to it. That's my opinion.
Babylon, New York has a carbon tax.
Do they?
Yeah.
Most of our funding comes from our local government partnership with PG&E, but there are some of the funding comes from our own organizational budget. So as a non-governmental organization, our fundraising, a portion of it gets dedicated to things like the communications and operations side and things like that. And then in some communities where we're working on the intersect with sustainable community strategies, some funding has come from the Strategic Growth Council in grant programs to them, or from private foundations. So, but it's, there is no sustained source of funding.
Yeah.
And there's no coordination between those sources of funding. So, for example, when we do a climate action plan in the Sierra Nevada, we can cover the energy and the natural gas side, but we can't cover the transportation and the waste sector. So we have to find a way to backfill that or come up with it somewhere else. Oh, and I should also say, local governments are contributing too. They're contributing in their staff time, in their technical expertise, and in all of the things that are necessary to move it forward. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, and also there's funding for staff, and then also just wanted to recognize that there's also a lot of funding for the services that are provided to our residents that don't necessarily go to our staff time, like ratepayer dollars, for example, through the local government partnerships and through the RENs. Those dollars provide energy efficiency and renewable energy services to our residents that don't necessarily fund our office, but they fund services that are consistent with what our office is trying to do.
Great. More questions? Yes.
Hi, my name is Alexa Washburn. I wear a couple different hats, but today I'm here as the program manager for the Western Riverside Council of Governments, and we're embarking on a regional climate action plan, partnered with ICLEI. And my question is for you, Timothy. Kudos to Berkeley for setting such aggressive 2020 targets. And when you were preparing and developing the climate action plan and set that reduction target and started developing your measures, were you able to successfully demonstrate that you could achieve that 2020 target when you set it? And then is it through the monitoring that you started to find we aren't going to make it, and so we might have to add additional measures?
It didn't happen quite that way. The sequence wasn't quite that way. Berkeley is it was a little bit unique in the process of setting our target, and that was our target was put on the ballot for local residents to vote. So back in 2006, the mayor's office wanted to sort of gauge the support within the community for developing a climate action plan, and so he put something on the ballot that said, should we establish a target of an 80% reduction by the year 2050 and develop a plan to achieve that target? And what percentage of people voted for that in Berkeley? 75? Not bad. Higher or lower?
Higher.
81%. It passed higher than, there was also something else on that same ballot it was already fully funded, and it was like something like building playgrounds for cute kids or something, and that got less of a vote than the climate action target. So overwhelming support in Berkeley for establishing this strong target, and then we started with the target, and then we developed the plan, and we said, okay, how are we going to achieve it? And to be honest, we weren't able to put together. We weren't able to effectively at least quantify reductions that were any feasible that could get us to that target. And honestly, since then, we've just gotten a lot better and understand a lot better how you have to consistently monitor this stuff and measure over time. So between we started that process in a couple years. It took about a year and a half to do. And since that time, which was it was adopted in 2009, we've learned a lot more about how to measure and quantify this stuff. So it's really only fairly recently that we can more effectively communicate what it's going to take and how far we are from that target. So if you're just starting that process, start now. Start thinking about it now. And there's so many great resources out there, ICLEI being one of them, to help you quantify those reductions. And then you just have to communicate them, like you said. You just have to use that information to communicate it to your leadership, because if you don't, then the climate action plan gets celebrated and then it sits on a shelf. It's not a live document. It doesn't get implemented.
Did you have a follow-up question? Or go ahead.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Courtney Smith from the Air Resources Board. I have a question about the relationship between regional efforts and local efforts, and it might be more for Cal and Timothy since you guys are in the Bay Area. Since MTC ABAG is in the process of finalizing their sustainable community strategy, I'm wondering if you think that that means that moving forward there will be a need to align your guys' local climate action plan to reflect those regional strategies.
Want to go first?
It's a good question. I hadn't thought about that as a problem. I'm guessing that we may be in San Francisco and maybe in Berkeley, we have more aggressive targets than what the region will come up with, because it tends to be, you've got the full 9 Bay Area counties, and not all of them are in that place. Not even within Alameda County. Certainly don't have unanimity there. You go out to Eastern County, and they don't believe in any of this stuff. So it's I don't think that's going to be a problem yet. It might be at some point in the future. I think the real question will be whether or not it's not so much the goals, because our goals are aligned with the state goals, is whether or not specific projects or programs are aligned. Certainly the Energy Watch BayREN was a question, how are they going to coordinate? Well, my colleague with her office right next to mine coordinates the Energy Watch, and got another guy coordinating the BayREN now, so we just go to lunch. It's like, it's not a problem. And we could also switch jobs for a while, and that would be another way of doing it. But it's, I think it's more kind of practical on the ground kinds of things to make sure that whatever the regional plan and the funding for something is actually going to work at the local level.
We have some Eastern Alameda County reps in the audience that would disagree with your perspective.
Not everybody.
On that.
Southern, so you can all talk about the Eastern people. They're
Right.
Here, I don't think.
Well, I worked in Alameda County for various years, and in South County, and had a lot of that kind of issue going on between North and South too.
I think in general the local action plans are aligned with the regional plans, and maybe it's okay as long as they're aligned in general. I mean, our climate action plan puts a lot of emphasis on transit-oriented development, for example. So I guess I would encourage more focus more on the implementation of the existing plans, rather than trying to do any more planning process that would align the regional or the local. I wouldn't spend time on that. Align in terms of implementation, but don't spend more time on planning. We've done a lot of planning. We know a lot about what has to happen. There's a major regional planning process through the sustainable community strategy. So I think it's the implementation of that's important.
Yes. I should have stayed up here. Another question about implementation. As all of you were developing your climate action plans, was the CEQA streamlining, the benefit of CEQA streamlining taken into account? And did you define a clear path for project consistency, so as projects come in, the planners are able to determine whether they're consistent and if they can take advantage of the CEQA streamlining? Was that at all key in developing?
So that option didn't exist when our plan was adopted in 2009, but we're taking a close look at that now, and there are some tweaks we'd have to do. We have most of the elements you need in order to use your cap to streamline the CEQA review, for at least the greenhouse gas portion of CEQA review for new development. But in order to use our cap in that way, we'd have to better document that all of those elements exist in it, and then create that bridge between a new development, that sort of checklist for a new development to demonstrate that they're consistent with the climate action plan. I think it depends a lot on the community on how valuable that tool is for you. If there's already ways within your community to make that CEQA process easier, or if new developments in your community are already green and transit oriented, they might not even be hitting the thresholds that triggers the greenhouse gas review for CEQA. And if that's the case, then it may not be worth your time to develop your cap in that way. On the other hand, things change over time. Maybe the thresholds change over time. And if you're just developing your climate action plan now, then I would definitely encourage you to make sure that it allows for CEQA streamlining, because now's the best time to do it if you're early in the process. Yeah.
I think in our region, it's definitely been a factor, at least in just opening the door to the conversation of developing this work. Like Steve had mentioned, I mean, we're so diverse politically. I think that's something that is common in any planning department, in any entity that we work with, and that's been kind of I guess, like the promise that we've been having to hold to, that we're going to try and deliver on when we're developing these plans.
Same here. That's really what's driving ours. In our region.
All right, we have time for one more question.
I hope this isn't too wonky, but I actually have the opposite problem that you have. And San Leandro, I'm Sally from San Leandro. We did a CAP goal of more in line with AB 32, not so ambitious as Berkeley. And when I came back to council after doing our 2010 inventories, I had to de-emphasize the numbers and not show them the gap, because our gap was actually trending so much lower because of vacancies, the sort of depression effect. So that I had to tell them, look, it looks really good here, but you have to take into account that commercial industrial fell because of this other economic reason. So has anybody else had that issue? And I was sort of surprised to see your graph be so smooth.
Stylized.
Yeah. So did you have that, the economic meltdown?
Yep.
Yeah, it did a little blip there?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. I should have said it was stylized. the important thing is the overall trend between 2011. That's what I was trying to communicate. But no, I obviously haven't had that problem. Have others encountered that?
I mean, that's been kind of part of the conversation for initially recruiting for our inventories. Is when we did at the beginning of our first round 3 years ago now, we were setting 2005 baselines, and that was kind of a good carrot to give the jurisdictions to incentivize them to work with us, because most of the jurisdictions in our region, 2005 was more of a booming year, and that would be that artificial drop. If that's their baseline, as they move forward in developing a cap, then they're going to get credit for market forces that were out of their control. So that was kind of a way for us to communicate, to get more of the governments to be involved.
But you're raising an issue that we have to remember, that there are a lot of game changers out there coming in that can run it one way or another, and there are going to be many of those sorts of effects that are going to happen. All of the projections about what the population's going to be, I don't know that that's going to happen. Those are just projections. What happens in the economy? If the Chinese economy crashes, as I was hearing last night, it might at some point soon. What impact would that have on San Francisco? Would be pretty stark, I think. It would definitely have an impact, and I don't know what the impact that would have on our greenhouse gas emissions. But I think we need to keep moving forward. But what you were saying about the numbers looking so rosy, I think that's just part of what is you did the right thing, is you just tell them what the story is. Here's what the numbers are, but look at what's happened to our economy. Does mean that you might have to look at other indicators like gross sales receipts or something to show them what's going on, and that if they're expecting it to recover, that which any member of the city council would be hoping would be happening at some point in the future, that you would expect to see those numbers going up too. But it really underlines what Steve and Tim were saying earlier, and that is you need to really make sure that your climate action strategies are aligned with other goals in the community, and as people see success, that those actions are also aligned with these other goals. Then it doesn't really, the climate stuff may come or go because it's helping them meet their goals. They're going to still be for it.
I think you hit another really important key communications challenge too, which is how do you communicate about uncertainty in a way that local decision makers can actually still move forward and make the tough decisions. And that's not an easy communications message. And there's a lot of uncertainty in the work that we do. And we just have to be honest and upfront about that and tell the stories. And, and work through that. But that's a tough one. Uncertainty plays against us, not for us generally in these things.
Yeah.
All right, unfortunately, we're out of time, so this has been a really great discussion. Please give our speakers another round of applause. Thank you.